The auction block stood empty now, its polished surface still warm from the heat lamps that had showcased the final lot. Marcus Chen watched from the shadows of the viewing gallery as the last of the alien buyers departed, their purchases secured in transport pods and loading bays. The great hall of Station Keth 7's slave market echoed with the hollow sound of their retreating footsteps. 300 years of galactic commerce was ending today. The Slave Trade Prohibition Act had finally passed through the Galactic Council, and every civilized species had signed the treaty. Every species except the humans, but that was only because nobody had bothered to invite Earth's representatives to the negotiations. As far as most of the galaxy was concerned, humans were barely past the Stone Age. Marcus adjusted his worn leather jacket and descended the steps toward the auction floor. His boots clicked against the metal grating, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. The Keth 7 auction house had been the largest slave market in the Outer Rim, processing thousands of sentient beings every cycle. Now it looked like a tomb. Impressive sight, isn't it? The voice belonged to Vex Corlandi, the station's chief auctioneer. The Zolonian's forearms gestured expansively at the empty space, his crystalline eyes reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. 3 centuries of tradition ended in a single day. Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Must be tough, losing your livelihood. Livelihood. Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Oh, my primitive friend, this is liberation. Do you know how exhausting it is to find buyers for defective merchandise? The paperwork alone for damaged goods could fill a cargo hold. Damaged goods. Indeed, creatures with missing limbs, psychological trauma, genetic defects. The more civilized species won't purchase anything that isn't perfect. Standards have become impossibly high. Vex paused, his crystalline gaze studying Marcus with renewed interest. Though I suppose that's why you're here. Marcus had arrived on Keth 7 3 days ago aboard his cargo hauler, the Wandering Star. Officially, he was here to purchase salvage equipment from the station's closing markets. Unofficially, he'd heard rumors about the final slave auction and couldn't stay away. The human in him was curious. The decent person in him was horrified. I'm just looking around, Marcus said. Never seen anything like this before. Of course not. Your species lacks the sophistication for such enterprises. Though I must admit, there's something refreshingly honest about human primitiveness. No pretense, no artificial standards of perfection. Vex gestured toward a reinforced door at the far end of the hall. Would you like to see something truly pathetic? Marcus followed the auctioneer through a maze of corridors lined with empty holding cells. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the station's belly. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and Marcus could smell the lingering traces of fear, desperation, and worse. Here we are, Vex announced, stopping before a heavy security door. The forgotten one. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, Marcus saw what had once been a holding cell, but now looked more like a medical isolation unit. Life support systems hummed quietly, maintaining atmosphere and temperature. In the center of the room, curled on a simple sleeping mat, was a figure unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The being was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin had a subtle iridescent quality, shifting between pale blue and silver in the artificial light. What Marcus initially took for hair was actually a complex array of fine, fiber optic-like filaments that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The creature's limbs were proportioned differently than a human's, longer, more graceful, with an extra joint in each arm and leg. But it was the scars that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Deep, deliberate markings covered the being's exposed skin. Not random wounds, but careful, surgical cuts that spoke of systematic torture. The creature's eyes were closed, but Marcus could see the rapid movement beneath its eyelids. Dreaming, or perhaps reliving nightmares. What is it? Marcus whispered. Unknown origin. Vex replied matter-of-factly. found drifting in a damaged escape pod near the Helix Nebula 15 cycles ago. No identification, no species match in any database. The scientific community was initially excited, but he gestured at the scars. Previous owners were less interested in study than in entertainment. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Entertainment. Some species find pain aesthetically pleasing. The Quartz Syndicate purchased this 16 cycles ago specifically for their gladiatorial exhibitions. Unfortunately, it proved disappointingly fragile. Broken too easily, healed too slowly. Poor return on investment. So what happens now? Vex's mandibles clicked again. Officially. Euthanization. The station is closing, and we can't afford to maintain life support for unmarketable inventory. The creature will be processed tomorrow morning. Marcus stared through the viewing panel. As he watched, the being's eyes opened. They were large, multifaceted like a dragonfly's, but with an unmistakably intelligent awareness behind them. For a moment, their gazes met through the transparent barrier. The creature didn't move, didn't react, but something passed between them in that instant of contact. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of one thinking being by another. How much? Marcus heard himself ask. Excuse me? How much to buy it? Vex's 4 arms spread in confusion. My primitive friend, did you not understand? This creature is unmarketable. No civilized species would. I'm not asking about civilized species, Marcus interrupted. I'm asking about humans. How much? The auctioneer's crystalline eyes studied Marcus for a long moment. You cannot be serious. Dead serious. But what would you do with it? Your species lacks the medical technology to maintain such a complex biology. You have no facilities for proper containment. And frankly, no offense intended, but humans have a reputation for being primitive in your treatment of other sentient beings. Marcus kept his gaze fixed on the creature in the cell. Those multifaceted eyes hadn't looked away, hadn't blinked. They seemed to be studying him just as intently as he was studying them. Maybe that's exactly what it needs, he said quietly. Someone primitive enough to see a person instead of property. The transaction took less than 10 minutes. Vex Corlandi seemed almost eager to complete the paperwork, as if the presence of an unsold slave in his records was somehow personally offensive. Marcus transferred 300 galactic credits, roughly equivalent to what he'd spent on lunch earlier that day, and found himself the legal owner of a sentient being whose name, species, and origins were completely unknown. You realize, Vex said as he processed the final documentation, that you're now responsible for its medical care, psychological welfare, and physical containment. The Galactic Health Authority requires. I'll figure it out, Marcus interrupted, signing the last of the digital forms with his biometric scanner. The device chirped its acceptance, and somewhere in the depths of galactic bureaucracy, his ownership was officially recorded. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood outside the holding cell with a maintenance droid and 2 security officers. The creature, his creature now, though the thought made him uncomfortable, had moved to the far corner of the room. It sat with its back against the wall, those fiber optic filaments in its hair pulsing with soft, irregular light. Standard procedure is sedation for transfer, one of the security officers explained. His species was unfamiliar to Marcus, but the universal translator handled the conversation seamlessly. Reduces stress for both the property and the owner. No sedation, Marcus said firmly. Just open the door. The officers exchanged glances. Sir, this creature has been through significant trauma. Its psychological state is unstable. For your own safety, open the door. The security officer shrugged and keyed in the access code. The heavy door slid open with a soft hiss of equalizing air pressure. The creature's head turned toward the sound, but it didn't move from its corner. Marcus stepped into the cell alone, ignoring the worried murmurs from the corridor behind him. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, roughly 3 meters square, with basic life support systems humming quietly in the walls. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and industrial cleaning solutions. The creature watched him approach, its multifaceted eyes tracking his movement with predatory precision. Up close, Marcus could see the full extent of the scaring. The wounds were old but still angry-looking, as if they'd been deliberately prevented from healing properly. Some looked surgical. Others looked like they'd been made for purely aesthetic reasons. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, crouching down about 2 meters away. "I'm Marcus. I just bought you, which I know sounds terrible, but I'm hoping we can figure out something better." The creature tilted its head slightly, those fiber optic filaments in its hair pulsing brighter for a moment. Marcus took that as a sign of interest, or at least attention. "I don't know what your name is, or where you're from, or what you've been through. But I know you're not property. You're a person, and no person should be locked in a cage." For several long seconds, they stared at each other in silence. Then, slowly, the creature began to move. It rose from its crouch with fluid grace, unfolding its elongated limbs with careful precision. Standing, it was taller than Marcus had expected, nearly 2 meters in height, with a willowy build that suggested either natural elegance or prolonged malnutrition. It took a single step forward, then stopped, waiting. Marcus extended his hand, palm up, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The creature looked at his hand for a long moment, then reached out with one of its own. The first contact was electric. Literally. A small shock passed between their skin, and Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation run up his arm. But more than that, there was something else. A brief flash of emotion that wasn't his own. Curiosity. Hope. And underneath it all, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of years of suffering. The creature jerked its hand back, those fiber optic filaments flaring bright white for an instant. It stared at Marcus with what might have been surprise, or fear, or wonder. "Interesting," Marcus murmured. "You're telepathic, aren't you?" The creature took another step forward, this time extending both hands. Marcus met them with his own, and the connection was stronger this time. Images flashed through his mind, not clear memories, but emotional impressions. Pain. Darkness. The sound of alien voices speaking in harsh, commanding tones. And then, suddenly, a new sensation. The feeling of standing in sunlight after years in a cave. "Yeah," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "I get it. You've been alone for a long time." The creature's mouth opened for the first time, revealing teeth that were sharp but not predatory, more like those of an omnivore adapted for a varied diet. It made a sound, soft and musical, that the universal translator couldn't parse. But Marcus didn't need translation. He could feel a meaning through their connection: gratitude. "Sir?" The security officer's voice came from the doorway. "We need to complete the transfer procedures." Marcus looked back at the creature, at the person he just purchased. "Can you walk? Are you hurt?" Another musical sound, and this time Marcus caught the emotional undertone: amusement. The creature gestured to its scared body with what might have been irony, then nodded toward the door. They left the holding cell together, Marcus walking slowly to match his companion's cautious pace. The creature moved like someone who'd learned to expect pain with every step, but who was determined to keep moving anyway. In the corridor, the security officers and maintenance droid fell into formation around them, treating the whole situation like a dangerous cargo transfer. "Where will you be taking it?" Vex asked as they reached the main processing area. "My ship," Marcus replied. "The Wandering Star, Docking Bay 7. "Ah." Vex's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "A cargo vessel, I assume. You'll want to set up proper containment. I can recommend several suppliers of restraint systems and monitoring equipment." Marcus felt his companion stiffen beside him, those fiber optic filaments dimming to almost nothing. Through their connection, he sensed a spike of fear and despair. No restraints, Marcus said firmly. No containment. It's not a prisoner. But surely you understand the liability issues. I understand that I just bought someone's freedom, not their cage. The walk to Docking Bay 7 took 15 minutes through the station's winding corridors. Marcus's companion stayed close beside him, occasionally reaching out to touch his arm when the crowds grew thick or the noise became overwhelming. Each contact brought another brief exchange of emotion: fear at the sight of certain alien species, curiosity about the station's architecture, and a growing sense of wonder at the simple fact of walking freely through space. The Wandering Star was a Hercules-class cargo hauler, built for durability rather than comfort. Her hull was scarred by countless micrometeorite impacts and hastily repaired hull breaches, but her engines were solid and her life support systems were reliable. To Marcus, she was home. To his companion, she was apparently the most beautiful thing in the universe. The creature stopped at the base of the loading ramp, staring up at the ship with those multifaceted eyes wide with something approaching reverence. Through their connection, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: awe, hope, and a deep longing for something that felt like home. "She's not much to look at," Marcus said, "but she's got good bones. And more importantly, she's got room. No cages, no cells. Just space to be yourself." His companion looked at him, then at the ship, then back at him. Those fiber optic filaments pulsed in a complex pattern that somehow conveyed more meaning than words ever could. Without the universal translator, Marcus shouldn't have understood. But through their growing connection, the meaning was crystal clear: thank you. They climbed the ramp together, leaving the institutional lighting of the docking bay for the warm, lived-in atmosphere of the Wandering Star's corridors. Marcus gave his companion a brief tour: the cargo holds, the engine room, the small galley and common area, and finally the spare cabin he'd hastily prepared during the transaction paperwork. The room was simple but comfortable: a bed, a chair, a small table, and a viewport looking out into space. More importantly, the door had no lock on the outside. Anyone could leave any time they wanted. His companion stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the simple furnishings as if they were made of precious metals. Then, slowly, it walked to the viewport and pressed its hands against the transparent aluminum. Through their connection, Marcus felt what his companion was feeling: the overwhelming sensation of possibility. For the first time in cycles, there was a future that extended beyond the next day's suffering. "I know you can't tell me your real name," Marcus said softly, "but I need to call you something. Would Echo work? Because you're like an echo of something beautiful that got lost in the dark." The creature turned from the viewport, those multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the window. It nodded once, a gesture that needed no translation. Echo. A name for someone who had been forgotten by the galaxy, but who Marcus was determined to help remember what it meant to be free. Outside the viewport, the stars waited, and for the first time in either of their lives, the future felt limitless. The Wandering Star's engines hummed to life 3 hours after they left Keth 7, their destination logged as a routine cargo run to the Centauri minor system. Marcus had filed all the proper documentation, paid his docking fees, and submitted his manifest to station traffic control. To anyone monitoring their departure, they were just another human trader heading out into the void with a hold full of recycled components and industrial surplus. Nobody mentioned the passenger. Marcus found Echo in the observation lounge, a small space just aft of the main cargo hold with wraparound viewports that offered a panoramic view of space. The former slave sat cross-legged on the deck, still wearing the simple gray coveralls provided by the auction house, watching the stars wheel slowly past as the ship rotated on its axis. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus asked from the doorway. Echo looked back at him, those fiber optic filaments in its hair pulsing with soft blue light. Through their growing connection, Marcus felt a complex emotion that took him a moment to interpret. Contentment mixed with disbelief, as if Echo couldn't quite accept that this moment was real. Marcus settled onto the deck beside his companion, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Over the past few hours, he'd learned that Echo was comfortable with brief physical contact, but still flinched at sudden movements. The scars weren't just physical. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, looking out at the star field, "about what happens next. I mean, legally you're still property. My property, which makes me sick to even think about. But if we're going to change that, we need to be smart about it." Echo tilted its head, those multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. Through their connection, Marcus felt a question. "How?" "Earth," Marcus said simply. "My home planet. It's not part of the Galactic Council yet, which means their laws don't apply there. And humans. Well, we've got our own complicated history with slavery. Most of us don't want anything to do with it anymore." The fiber optic filaments in Echo's hair pulsed brighter, shifting from blue to a warm golden color. Hope, Marcus realized. That's what hope looked like in Echo's unique biology. "There's just one problem," Marcus continued. "Earth is 3 weeks away, and we're going to have to pass through some very unfriendly space to get there. The moment word gets out that a human bought a slave and set it free, every bounty hunter and enforcement agency in the sector is going to be looking for us." Echo's expression grew serious, those multifaceted eyes focusing on Marcus with laser intensity. Through their connection, he felt a surge of determination mixed with something that might have been protectiveness. The message was clear. "We face this together." "I was hoping you'd say that," Marcus said with a smile. "Because I'm going to need your help. I don't know what abilities your species has or what you're capable of, but I get the feeling you're more than just a victim." In response, Echo stood and walked to the viewport. It placed both hands flat against the transparent aluminum and closed its eyes. The fiber optic filaments in its hair began to pulse in a complex rhythm, cycling through colors Marcus had never seen before. And then, something impossible happened. The stars outside the viewport began to move. Not the slow, predictable rotation of the ship's artificial gravity, but something else entirely. Individual points of light shifted position, drawing closer together, forming patterns that Marcus's mind struggled to process. "Jesus," he whispered. Echo opened its eyes and looked back at him, those fiber optic filaments now glowing with steady white light. Through their connection, Marcus felt a mix of pride and exhaustion. Whatever Echo had just done, it had taken considerable effort. "You can manipulate gravity," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "Or space-time itself. That's how you're moving the stars." Echo nodded, then gestured to the scars covering its body. Through their connection, Marcus felt a wave of bitter memory. Alien scientists conducting experiments, pushing Echo's abilities to their limits, using pain as motivation when cooperation wasn't forthcoming. "They tortured you to make you perform," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "That's why the Quarth Syndicate bought you. Not for gladiatorial combat, but as a weapon." Another nod, and this time the emotional undertone was pure rage. But the anger wasn't directed at Marcus. It was focused on something much farther away, something that had hurt Echo in ways that went beyond physical scars. "Well," Marcus said, standing and placing a gentle hand on Echo's shoulder, "they made a mistake. They thought breaking you would make you controllable. But all they did was teach you how strong you really are." Echo's fiber optic filaments pulsed once, a brief flash of gratitude and affection that made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. Then, suddenly, they both felt it. A subtle shift in the ship's movement, a change in the background vibration that meant only one thing. They were dropping out of hyperspace. Marcus was moving before his conscious mind had fully processed the danger, racing toward the bridge with Echo close behind him. The Wandering Star's navigation computer was flashing red warnings, and the main display showed exactly what Marcus had feared. 3 ships on intercept courses, moving fast and with obvious hostile intent. Korth Syndicate cruisers, Marcus muttered, recognizing the distinctive silhouettes on the scanner. They must have been monitoring the auction house networks. Echo moved to the co-pilot's seat, those multifaceted eyes studying the tactical display with professional interest. Through their connection, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: fear, determination, and something that might have been anticipation. "Can you help?" Marcus asked, his hands flying over the navigation controls as he tried to plot an escape vector. In response, Echo placed both hands on the ship's sensor array interface. The fiber optic filaments in its hair began to glow, cycling through a rainbow of colors as it interfaced directly with the wandering star's systems. Suddenly, the tactical display exploded with new information. The pursuing ship's energy signatures became crystal clear, their weapon systems outlined in precise detail, their flight paths predicted with mathematical accuracy. More than that, Marcus could see weak points in their shielding, optimal targeting solutions, even the psychological profiles of their crews based on flight patterns and communication intercepts. "You're not just manipulating gravity," Marcus breathed. "You're manipulating information itself. Quantum probability, electromagnetic fields, the fundamental structure of reality." Echo looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Marcus saw something like a smile cross its alien features. Through their connection, he felt a surge of fierce joy. Finally, someone who understands. The first Korth cruiser opened fire, plasma bolts streaking across the void toward the wandering star's position. But Echo was already moving, its hands dancing across the control interfaces as it bent space around them. The energy blasts curved away harmlessly, redirected back toward their point of origin. "Holy hell," Marcus whispered, watching the attacking ship's own weapons impact against its shields. But Echo wasn't finished. It stood from the co-pilot's seat and moved to the main engineering console, placing both hands on the ship's power distribution system. The wandering star's engines suddenly blazed with impossible efficiency, drawing energy from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. They accelerated away from the Korth cruisers at 3 times their normal maximum velocity, leaving the heavier warships behind like they were standing still. Within minutes, they were clear of the engagement zone and jumping back into hyperspace, their destination now a carefully randomized point in deep space. Marcus slumped back in the pilot's seat, adrenaline leaving him shaky and exhausted. "That was incredible. You saved us." Echo returned to the co-pilot's seat, its fiber optic filaments fading back to their normal soft glow. Through their connection, Marcus felt a complex mix of satisfaction and concern. They'd won this round, but Echo knew better than anyone that the Korth Syndicate didn't give up easily. "They'll keep coming," Marcus said, reading the emotion correctly. "Won't they?" Echo nodded, then reached out and placed one hand on Marcus's arm. The contact brought a flood of images: safe houses, hidden routes, allies scattered across the galaxy who owed Echo favors from before its capture. But underneath it all was a deeper message. "You don't have to do this. You can still turn back." Marcus looked into those multifaceted eyes, seeing his own reflection multiplied 1,000 times. In each reflection, he saw the same thing: determination. "Turn back," he said. "Echo, 3 hours ago, you were scheduled for execution. Now you're free, and you just saved both our lives with abilities that make you one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. There's no turning back from that. There's only moving forward." Echo's fiber optic filaments pulsed once, a brief flash of pure white light that somehow conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. Then it settled back into the co-pilot's seat, its hands moving to the navigation controls. New coordinates appeared on the display, not Earth, but somewhere else entirely. A place that existed in the gaps between official star charts, known only to those who lived in the shadows of galactic civilization. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked. Echo's answer came not through their connection, but through the ship's computer, its quantum manipulation abilities allowing it to interface directly with the translation systems, to find the others like us, the ones who were also left behind. The coordinates Echo had programmed led them to a system that didn't officially exist. According to every star chart in Marcus's database, the space they were approaching contained nothing but cosmic dust and radiation. But as the wandering star dropped out of hyperspace, their sensors revealed something extraordinary. A massive construct floating in the void, clearly artificial, but unlike anything in the standard architectural databases. "It's beautiful," Marcus whispered, staring at the structure through the main viewport. The construct looked organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Flowing, curved surfaces caught and reflected starlight in impossible ways, creating patterns that seemed to shift and dance as they watched. It was easily the size of a small moon, but it moved through space with the fluid grace of a living creature. Echo's fiber optic filaments were pulsing in complex patterns, brighter than Marcus had ever seen them. Through their connection, he felt waves of emotion so intense they nearly knocked him off his feet. Joy, relief, recognition, and underneath it all, the overwhelming sensation of coming home. "You know this place," Marcus said. Echo nodded, then moved to the communications console. Its hands danced over the controls, but instead of using the standard radio frequencies, it was doing something else entirely. The fiber optic filaments in its hair blazed with white light, and Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation in his skull. They were broadcasting on quantum frequencies, he realized, communicating directly with whatever intelligence controlled the construct. The response came immediately. The construct's surface began to glow with the same patterns as Echo's hair, and Marcus felt a presence touch the edge of his consciousness. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien, but not hostile. If anything, it felt curious about the human who had somehow bonded with one of its own kind. A docking bay opened in the construct's surface, its edges lined with the same organic-looking material as the rest of the structure. Guidance lights appeared, leading them toward a berth that seemed perfectly sized for the wandering star. "I guess we're invited," Marcus said, engaging the docking thrusters. The bay sealed behind them as they landed, and Marcus watched in fascination as the chamber filled with atmosphere that registered as perfectly breathable on their sensors. More than that, the air composition was precisely calibrated for both human and Echo's physiological needs, something that should have been impossible without detailed biological data. Echo was already moving toward the airlock, those fiber optic filaments practically incandescent with excitement. Marcus hurried to follow, grabbing a portable translator and emergency supplies out of habit more than necessity. The airlock cycled, and they stepped into a corridor that defied every architectural principle Marcus knew. The walls curved and flowed like frozen water, but they were clearly solid. Bioluminescent strips provided gentle illumination that seemed to respond to their presence, brightening as they approached and dimming behind them. But it was the figures waiting for them that made Marcus stop in his tracks. There were 7 of them, and while no 2 were identical, they all shared certain characteristics with Echo. The same elongated limbs, the same graceful proportions, the same fiber optic filaments that pulse with inner light. But each was unique in its own way, different coloration, different patterns of scaring, different modifications that spoke of adaptation to various environments or circumstances. Echo moved toward them with obvious joy, and Marcus felt the emotional resonance through their connection as the group embraced. It was like watching a family reunion after years of separation, if families communicated through quantum entanglement and shared consciousness. One of the figures approached Marcus, taller than Echo, with silver-blue skin and filaments that glowed with steady amber light. When it spoke, the words formed directly in Marcus's mind without the need for translation. "Welcome, Marcus Chen of Earth. I am known as Weaver. We have been watching your journey with great interest." "You know my name," Marcus said, trying not to show how unsettled he felt by the telepathic contact. Echo has been broadcasting your shared experiences since you left the station. Your species is unexpected. We had not anticipated that any of the younger races would show such understanding. Another figure stepped forward, this one bearing scars similar to Echo's, but arranged in different patterns. I am called Fragment. Like our friend, I was property of the Quarth Syndicate until recently. Your actions have created complications. Marcus felt a chill. What kind of complications? The Syndicate has issued a bounty for Echo's return. 10 million galactic credits, alive only. They claim it is stolen property of extreme value. But the slave trade is illegal now. The Galactic Council. The Galactic Council's authority extends only to its member species, Weaver interjected. Humans are not members. Earth is not protected. And the Quarth Syndicate has many allies among the civilized races who prefer the old ways. Echo moved to Marcus's side, one hand touching his arm. Through their connection, he felt a complex mix of guilt and determination. Echo had known this would happen, had known that helping it would put Marcus in danger. But it had hoped, they had both hoped, that freedom might be worth the risk. So what do we do? Marcus asked. That depends, said another figure, this one with skin that shifted between deep purple and black. Are you prepared to become an enemy of the galactic establishment? Because that is what you have already done, whether you realize it or not. Marcus looked around at the assembled beings, each one a survivor of unimaginable suffering, each one bearing the scars of a civilization that saw them as property rather than people. Through his connection with Echo, he could feel their shared pain, their collective trauma, and their desperate hope for something better. I didn't set out to start a revolution, he said finally. I just saw someone who needed help. And that, Weaver said, is precisely why you may be the catalyst we have been waiting for. The amber-lit figure gestured, and the corridor around them began to change. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast interior of the construct. Marcus gasped at what he saw. Thousands of beings, representing dozens of species, all moving through a complex network of chambers and passages. Some he recognized from galactic databases, former slave races that had supposedly been integrated into civilized society. Others were completely unknown, species that existed in the gaps between official recognition. Welcome to Haven, Weaver said, the last free city in the galaxy. Built by those who were forgotten, powered by those who were discarded, populated by those who refused to accept their designated place in the cosmic order. How many? Marcus whispered. Over 50,000 souls, representing more than 200 species. All of them refugees from the galactic civilization that you still consider legitimate. Fragment moved closer, its scared hands gesturing toward the bustling activity below. They come seeking freedom, but they find something more valuable. Purpose. Each being here contributes their unique abilities to our collective survival. Echo's quantum manipulation capabilities, for instance, helped us develop our dimensional shielding technology. Marcus felt Echo's pride through their connection, mixed with something else. The deep satisfaction of belonging somewhere, of being valued for abilities rather than punished for them. But why show me this? Marcus asked. I'm just one human with a cargo ship. Because you represent something we thought was extinct in the younger races. The willingness to see beyond classification, beyond species, beyond the artificial hierarchies that the galactic establishment uses to maintain control. Weaver's amber filaments pulsed brighter. And because Echo has chosen to bond with you in a way that our species has not experienced for millennia. Marcus looked at Echo, seeing his own confusion reflected in those multifaceted eyes. Bond. The connection you share goes beyond simple telepathic contact, Fragment explained. It is a quantum entanglement of consciousness itself. Among our people, such bonds were once common, the foundation of our entire civilization. But the trauma of slavery, the systematic breaking of our mental architecture, has made them nearly impossible to achieve. Until now, Weaver added, Echo's bond with you has begun to heal damage we thought was permanent. More than that, it has shown us something we had forgotten. True partnership is possible between species if both sides are willing to see each other as equals. Echo's hand tightened on Marcus's arm, and through their connection he felt a flood of memory. Flashes of Echo's homeworld before the conquest, cities of impossible beauty where beings like Echo worked together through quantum consciousness, achievements in science and art that made current galactic civilization look primitive by comparison. And then the darkness, invasion, subjugation, the systematic destruction of everything that made Echo's people unique. The survivors scattered across the galaxy, sold into slavery, their abilities exploited until they were broken beyond repair. All except for those who found their way to Haven. You're not just refugees, Marcus said, understanding dawning. You're the remnants of a civilization that was more advanced than anything the galaxy has now. Was and will be again, Weaver confirmed. If we can survive long enough to rebuild. But the galactic establishment will not allow that. They cannot permit the existence of a society that exposes the lie of their supremacy. Which brings us back to our original question, Fragment said. What do we do about the bounty on Echo's head? And more importantly, what do we do about you? Marcus felt the weight of their expectations, the hope and fear radiating from dozens of minds touched by the quantum network that connected Haven's inhabitants. Through Echo, he could sense the broader conversation happening throughout the construct. Thousands of beings debating the implications of his presence, the opportunities and risks it represented. What are my options? He asked. You could stay here, Weaver said. Haven exists outside normal spacetime. We could provide you with sanctuary, protection, a place where you and Echo could develop your bond without interference. And the other option? You could return to your own people. Convince them to recognize our independence, to stand against the galactic establishment's attempts to destroy us. Become an ambassador between two civilizations that have more in common than either realizes. Marcus looked out at the impossible city below, then at Echo beside him, then at the scared survivors who had somehow built paradise in the void between stars. There's a third option, he said quietly. The assembled beings waited, their fiber optic filaments pulsing with anticipation. We fight back. The War Council convened in Haven's central chamber, a vast spherical space at the heart of the construct where representatives from every species could gather without the limitations of conventional architecture. Marcus found himself floating in midair alongside beings whose names he was still learning to pronounce, their various anatomies adapted to aquatic, aerial, and zero-gravity environments. Through his bond with Echo, he could sense the quantum network that connected them all. A shared consciousness that allowed for communication beyond the limitations of language or individual perspective. It was overwhelming at first, like trying to drink from a fire hose, but Echo's presence in his mind helped him filter the information flow. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, reported a being called Nexus, whose crystalline body refracted the chamber's bioluminescent lighting into prismatic rainbows. Our surveillance networks indicate that the Korth Syndicate has convinced 3 major galactic powers to classify Haven as a terrorist organization. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Which powers? The Zolonian Trade Federation, the Arcturus Military Commonwealth, and the Helix Corporate Collective. Fragment answered, its scared features grim. Combined, they control 60% of known space and 70% of the galaxy's military assets. They're calling it the Reclamation Initiative, added another being, one of the aquatic species whose name Marcus couldn't quite grasp through the quantum link. Official objective: the recovery of stolen property and the elimination of threats to galactic stability. Echo's fiber optic filaments flared with anger, and through their bond, Marcus felt the depth of its rage. Not just at being labeled property, but at the casual dismissal of 50,000 lives as threats to be eliminated. There is more, Weaver said, its amber light casting complex shadows in the spherical chamber. Intelligence suggests they have developed new weapons specifically designed to counter our quantum manipulation abilities. Technology derived from studying our people during their captivity. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They're going to use what they learned from torturing you to kill you. Indeed, the irony is not lost on us. How long do we have? Marcus asked. The joint fleet is assembling at Kepler Station, Nexus reported. Current projections suggest they will be ready to move within 10 standard days. Once they begin their approach, Haven's location will be compromised regardless of our dimensional shielding. Marcus looked around the chamber at the assembled beings, each one a survivor of unimaginable trauma. Each one now facing the possibility of complete annihilation. Through the quantum network, he could sense their fear, their determination, and their desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, they might find a way to survive. What are our options? He asked. We could attempt to relocate Haven, suggested one of the aerial species, its multiple wings creating gentle currents in the chamber's atmosphere. Move deeper into uncharted space, perhaps beyond the galactic rim. Impossible, Fragment countered. The energy requirements for moving a construct of this size would be detectable across half the galaxy. And we have too many people now. Evacuation would take months we don't have. We could negotiate, offered another voice. Offer to return to slavery in exchange for the safety of those who cannot defend themselves. The suggestion was met with such a wave of revulsion through the quantum network that Marcus actually staggered from the psychic backlash. Echo's hand steadied him, its own emotional response burning like acid through their bond. No, Weaver said, its voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had lived through the alternative. We have all experienced what galactic civilization calls mercy. We know what their promises are worth. Then we fight, Marcus said, the words coming out more forcefully than he'd intended. With what? Nexus's crystalline form flickered with frustrated light. We have 50,000 souls, most of them traumatized survivors with no military training. They have 3 battle fleets and weapons designed specifically to kill us. You have something they don't, Marcus countered. You have abilities they can barely understand, let alone counter. And more than that, you have something worth fighting for. He gestured toward the chamber's transparent walls, through which they could see the impossible city that the refugees had built. Gardens that grew in zero gravity, workshops where beings from a dozen different species collaborated on technologies that pushed the boundaries of known science, schools where children who had never known freedom learned what it meant to dream. They see you as property, Marcus continued, as things to be owned, used, and discarded. But you're so much more than that. You're living proof that their entire civilization is built on a lie. Through the quantum network, he felt the stirring of something that had been dormant in too many of the refugees for too long. Pride. Not in what they had been, but in what they had become despite everything that had been done to them. Echo moved closer, its hand finding Marcus's arm. Through their bond, he felt a surge of determination mixed with desperate affection. Echo was willing to fight, willing to die if necessary, but the thought of losing what they had found together was almost unbearable. There is a possibility, Weaver said slowly, its amber filaments pulsing with careful consideration. Dangerous beyond measure, but possible. What? Marcus asked, though he could already sense through the quantum network that whatever Weaver was considering made even the battle-hardened survivors of Haven nervous. The convergence protocol, Weaver said, and the reaction through the quantum link was immediate and intense. Fear, awe, and desperate hope crashed together in a wave of emotion that made Marcus's head spin. Fragment's scared features grew even more grim. That was theoretical even before the conquest. No one has attempted it for over 1,000 cycles. What is it? Marcus asked through his bond with Echo, since speaking aloud seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they were discussing. The answer came not from Echo alone, but from the collective memory of Haven's quantum network. Images flooded Marcus's consciousness. Echo's people at the height of their civilization, thousands of quantum-sensitive beings linked together in perfect harmony, their combined consciousness capable of manipulating reality itself on a galactic scale. The convergence protocol would link every quantum-sensitive being in Haven through a single consciousness matrix, Weaver explained. Our combined abilities would be amplified exponentially, allowing us to reshape local spacetime itself. Reshape it how? Marcus asked, though part of him already understood. We could move Haven outside of normal dimensional space entirely, Nexus said, its crystalline form brightening with excitement. Create a pocket universe where the laws of physics bend to our will. An impregnable fortress that exists between the spaces where conventional weapons cannot reach. Or we could fail catastrophically and kill everyone aboard, Fragment added grimly. The quantum harmonics required for the protocol are incredibly precise. One miscalculation, one mind that cannot maintain the link, and the resulting cascade failure would tear Haven apart at the molecular level. Marcus felt Echo's tension through their bond and suddenly understood the deeper implication. You need someone to anchor the link, someone who can maintain quantum coherence while everyone else manipulates reality. Precisely. And traditionally, that anchor would be the most experienced quantum manipulator in the group. Weaver's amber light dimmed slightly. Unfortunately, most of our people have been damaged by their experiences. The systematic torture, the forced use of our abilities, the psychological conditioning designed to break our will. It has left few of us capable of maintaining the necessary mental discipline. Echo stepped forward, its fiber optic filaments blazing with sudden determination. Through their bond, Marcus felt its decision even before it spoke through the quantum link. I will be the anchor. The reaction was immediate and unanimous. No. Echo, you are barely healed from your own trauma, Fragment said gently. The protocol requires absolute mental stability. Any hesitation, any moment of doubt or fear, could kill us all. Then we find another way, Weaver said firmly. We will not sacrifice you after finally getting you back. But Echo was already shaking its head, those multifaceted eyes burning with fierce resolve. There is no other way. You know this. I am the only one here whose quantum manipulation abilities are still at full strength, whose mind has not been completely shattered by what they did to us. Marcus felt the truth of it through their bond, and it broke his heart. Echo was the strongest among them precisely because it had been the most recently enslaved, the most recently tortured. The others had been broken and rebuilt so many times that their abilities were shadows of what they once were. I will not permit it, Weaver said, its amber light flaring with protective anger. We have lost too many of our people already. And we will lose them all if we do nothing, Echo replied. The fleet will arrive in 10 days. They will destroy Haven and everyone in it. At least this way, we have a chance. Marcus watched the debate flow through the quantum network, feeling the weight of 50,000 lives pressing down on all of them. Through his bond with Echo, he could sense his companion's fear, not of death, but of failure, of letting down the people who had become family. There's another option, Marcus said quietly. The quantum network fell silent, all attention focused on the human who had somehow found himself at the center of their desperate situation. What if Echo doesn't anchor alone? Explain, Weaver said. Marcus took Echo's hand, feeling the familiar tingle of their quantum connection. Our bond goes both ways, right? I can feel what Echo feels, sense what it senses. What if that connection could be used to stabilize the anchor point? Fragment's scared features showed surprise. You would link yourself to the protocol. But you are human. Your species has no natural quantum sensitivity. No, but I have something else. Something that might be more important. Marcus looked around the chamber at the assembled survivors, feeling their hope and desperation through the network. I have absolute faith in what we're doing. No doubt, no hesitation, no trauma from past failures. just the complete certainty that freedom is worth any risk.